Hi guys, so life is really complicated and I was thinking about things earlier and then I ended up getting drunk and stopping thinking about those things. I'm thinking about other things instead and there's a cat over there. And there's another cat over there. But yeah, I can't remember what I just said. I think I said I got drunk and I thought about other things. But yeah, earlier I was like I was gonna write an essay about the meaning of life, but then I got stuck up on the language of the actual question. So I was trying to decide a question to ask, and I was like, okay, what question should I ask? Should I try and be clever about it, or go about it by saying, what is the meaning of life? Which is basically the question in its most simplest form. But it turns out that question actually wasn't very simple because I had to assess the idea that the question was actually being presumptuative. Can't remember what that word is. Was pointing towards a certain answer. In that it assumed that there is one specific meaning of life because it says what is the meaning of life. By saying what is the meaning of life assumes that there is one meaning of life, meaning the question wants you to give one meaning of life. And the whole part of answering questions is actually making sure that the other person is asking good questions or that you're asking good questions in return. Because the question is a very important thing because it's the means of which we use in order to get answers. And if there's misunderstanding within the question, or if the question's trying to lead us somewhere, then maybe it's not such a great question. Or unless the question is trying to lead us in the right direction, which is possible as well, because also my criticism of the question could suggest that I have an opposition to the way in which the question is leading me. Whereas if I already took the stance that there is one objective meaning to life, then maybe I wouldn't be so opposed to this idea that the question is trying to point me towards there being one ultimate meaning, hence the meaning of life. What is this? And I don't know. So that's what I started writing an essay about anyway, and I just got a bit caught up on the actual language of the question. I haven't actually started answering the question yet, but I was going to start off with I did plan on I don't know if I did plan on looking at the language first actually. I mean, I probably did. I think, well, I just noticed that was an important thing that I had to cover. So I did like 2 paragraphs on that. And then I've got to do another paragraph, probably talking about the objective, like, in support of like the objective meaning of life. And then maybe follow that up with like how this isn't such a good idea and maybe how subjectivity is better. But I don't know how I'm going to finish. Like, it's going to be so hard. And then I think I'm going to finish in like the meaning of life is just to live. And what do I mean by just to live? I mean, like, it's really hard to captivate this with actual language because language is negating in many ways. And the question as big as the meaning of life, it's like, well, that's hard. It's like, well, you say life just has meaning because it's almost like a tautological statement. Like, to live is to actually live. It's not just. But then what do you mean by live? And I don't know. There's just so much I haven't thought about with this question. Maybe I have thought about it, but I haven't thought about it in enough depth to be able to actually write it down. And that's a really difficult thing, because there's a lot of things to be thought about every issue that's in philosophy, and there's so many other questions that arise when we're trying to figure out answers. Like, for example, one of the questions that rose up within that essay context was, does the existence of an ultimate objective meaning discount the possibility or the possible existence of subjective meanings alongside the subjective meaning? And that applies the same vice versa. So does the presence of subjective meanings discount the idea or the phenomena of an objective meaning? And I don't know. And then obviously alongside that, you've got the problem of what do we actually mean by objective and subjective, because there's different ways in which we can define these words. So we could mean objective as in applying everywhere within the human experience, but it doesn't actually exist nominally. Or we could mean objective as in it does exist nominally and it exists independent of the human experience, and we could regard this as some kind of God, but then that's assuming that God exists nominally of the human experience. But then again, perhaps God would be more perfect, and presumably God is the most perfect being. God would be more perfect if he did exist nominally of the human experience, because that means that God is necessary, and he's not necessary, and he's not contingent. because a contingent being is dependent on something else, and if God is only existing within the context of the human experience, then he is contingent. That means he's necessary on humans in order for his survival. But maybe we're wrong about God, and maybe it's more like the Bonhoeffer idea of God, where God was sent out onto the cross and to suffer and bear the suffering of humanity, and he's not necessarily this being who is omnipotent and isn't subject to things like suffering and human emotions. Rather, he actually is subject to these things, meaning that God isn't completely perfect, and we're sort of wrong about his nature in many ways. There's so much to think about and so much to talk about, but I feel like I'm willing to do it. Anyway, that's I think that's it. I talked a little bit. Talked about an essay I want to write. I'm a little bit drunk. I need to go to bed. Alright, thank you for watching.